This program is made possible by the loyal financial support of the friends and partners of Family Policy Institute.
You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world.
Good evening and welcome to Salt and Light. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we're going to show you an address by the Chief Justice of South Africa, Mogoeng, that he made at a prayer event at Parliament recently. Following his talk, I will interview the Chief Justice about topical events that happened in South Africa over the past 5 years. Enjoy the show.
As Dr. Cooper has indicated, I've been asked to share some reflections on post-independence South Africa. And I believe those reflections are necessary for what is about to happen in this great country. We need to take stock of where we come from, where we are, and reflect on the way forward. But of great importance is that whatever it is we're going to do going forward must be based on the truth. Because the truth of the matter is we've been comfortable with distorted versions of where we come from and where we are. And anything built on a false foundation will crumble. It cannot stand. So just some reflections on where we come from. I begin where Dr. Mishwe ended, and that is a reference to Nelson Mandela, the first president of this great nation. It is fitting that I do so because in South Africa we have declared this the year of Nelson Mandela, have we not? And similarly, the African Union has declared 2018 the year of Nelson Mandela. His bust is somewhere not far from where we are. So what is it that Mandela had to say about South Africa as at the time he assumed office? Some of the issues he raised, which we dare not forget, are the following. He reflected on the state of unemployment as at the time. He said unemployment was in 2 digits, inflation was in 2 digits, but there was also something very worrisome which has not come to an end. It came to an end temporarily but has resurfaced. It was our budget deficit. When the democratic government took over, our deficit stood at 254 billion rands. And as they reflected on where the money came from, they discovered that 90% of that money was the pension for the workers in this country. And it is perhaps better to state it exactly how he put it. He says, let me quote him, but what was even more shattering was the discovery when we took over that this country had a public debt of no less than 254 billion, which we are now paying at the rate of 50 billion rands a year. That is the 50 billion rands which we do not have in order to create jobs and to reduce the rate of unemployment. More than 90% of this debt we owed to our workers. What the apartheid regime did here was to take pension funds and to support and to enrich themselves out of those pension funds. So that's where we were. He spent quite some time in the book dedicated to his presidential years, Dare Not Linger, We Dare Not Linger, explaining challenges relating to the land, to the economy, and making undertakings in relation to what needs to be done to improve our situation, just on the land. he says, communities large and small who had occupied areas from time immemorial where their ancestors and loved ones were buried, were mercilessly uprooted and thrown into the open field, there to fend for themselves, and this was done by a white community led by an educated but infamous clergy and its successors who used their skills and religion to commit various atrocities against the black majority which God forbade. Yet, they hypocritically claimed that their evil schemes were inspired by God. Madiba went on to say, in their daily lives, these men and women whose regime committed these unparalleled atrocities wore expensive outfits and went regularly to church. In actual fact, they represented everything for which the devil stood. Notwithstanding all their claims to be a community of devout worshippers, their policies were denounced by almost the entire civilized world as a crime against humanity, close quote. Now, maybe I shouldn't quote, but he then spent quite a lot of time urging South Africans, black and white, to see it as their individual and collective responsibility to heal the wounds of the past, to work towards making a united South Africa a practical reality. He appealed to every South African to tap into whatever resources they had at their command to address the plight of the poor so that South Africa can become a practical expression of the promise that is held out by our Constitution. I meant to quote generously from what Mandela said, but maybe time does not permit. Here is the starting point. When we became a constitutional democracy, there was a lot of work to be done because a lot of damage had been done by the previous regime. Then came in a new government with promises that we all know of in our Constitution. And the question is, what then happened? Many houses were built, schools were built, classrooms were built, to contribute to the skills revolution that President Mandela said needed to happen in order for us to become that nation that our Constitution says we have all it takes to become. 2 universities were built, some jobs were created, clinics were built, hospitals were built, electricity and water rollout projects began in full speed. As you know, the reconstruction and development program was implemented to a point. So there is a lot of good work that has been done. Social pensions were given to our people somewhat generously. A lot of good work has been done. But there is a lot of negativity that also came our way. Money, some of the money that was dedicated towards the construction of houses was paid out without a single house being built. Others, only foundations. In some instances, houses were actually built but crumbled. In some instances, money was paid out for schools which were never built. Corruption crept in. And let me pause there and say, corruption is not a black thing. It's one of the truths that we must connect with so that we can move forward from the basis of the truth, because only the truth can really free us. Corruption is a human weakness. It is there all over the world, in all nations of the world, and has always been there. It's just that some people have developed an incredible capacity to manage it so that it doesn't look like corruption, even if it is. They've become professors or experts of corruption, and South Africa is no exception. So black and white South Africans commit corruption Not all of them. Let's settle that one. And any government you establish, as long as it is driven by those who fear nothing, is bound to be corrupt. It's got nothing to do with color. So corruption set in. Unfortunately, we paid more attention to public sector corruption and very little, if any, attention to private sector corruption. So some people who are corrupt in the private sector kept on corrupting those who are in government. We haven't been even ended. There hasn't been justice in the manner in which we report on or talk about corruption in this country. No wonder it is not coming to an end. So that's one of the realities that we'll have to connect with going forward, to root out corruption wherever it can be located. In case you doubt my statement, look at what the Competition Commission has been revealing. Private sector corruption. Lauren Cunningham wrote a book, the book that transformed nations, and that actually refers to the Bible, but in a very practical way. He's been able to allow himself to be used by God to transform many governments and many nations through that message. This is what he had to say. And this, to the brethren who come from Nigeria, just next door to Nigeria, there's a small country known as Benin. The president, who was a communist, got born again and invited Lauren Cunningham to come and address his cabinet about what is it that needs to be done when the situation was as dark as it was then and as unsatisfactory as it is now in South Africa. This is what he had to say. But before I quote what he said, let me give you a background. He said, one of the cabinet ministers said, but why are we so poor as Benin? And then he answered himself and said, it's because we don't have any mineral or natural resources to write home about. And this was the answer. You are not poor because you lack natural resources. Look at Switzerland. They have very few resources and yet they are rich. Switzerland's prosperity came because people want their products. Whether they make a chocolate bar or a watch, everybody knows the Swiss will make it with precision. Furthermore, you can't have precision without integrity. The Swiss have integrity. They also have high regard for justice and generosity. Every village has some kind of charitable project, especially for refugees. You need a critical mass of people who have integrity, who have character. Integrity is so important for a country's economy. We don't trust people who cheat to get the critical jobs like engineering or construction of skyscrapers or manufacturing airplanes. A person who cheats, he or she will cheat on big things as well as little ones, close quotes. He then referred to Singapore and Japan, that they are very prosperous and yet have very little mineral or natural resources to write home about. So what am I talking about? It starts with a leader. Happily for South Africans, next year is the year for the elections. Joseph turned around the fortunes of Egypt, though he was only one in partnership with God. Why? He had integrity. So he could do everything with precision. He wouldn't corrupt anything. Even if the king was not watching, he would just make sure that the resources go where they are supposed to go. Integrity. Josiah was an 8-year-old boy when he became a king. And he revolutionized that nation, meaning that if you were ever to have for a leader at any level, even a single individual who has integrity, then change will begin to happen. 8 years old. He was a mentor of pastors and bishops. He's the one who alerted them to the reality that they had neglected their responsibilities. Similarly, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, only 4. If you are a leader of integrity, not pretending to be one, God will endow you with a kind of excellent wisdom that was manifest in the life of Daniel. He will give you the divine capacity to solve mysteries and explain puzzles. That's what Daniel chapter 5 is saying. You will be the light, the repository of understanding. You will be sought after when nobody else is available to address the challenges that confront the nation or whatever institution you serve in. So, check it out, even here. When the leader is right, things get right. Amen. Happily, as I said, next year is just around the corner. Pray about it, reflect on it, talk to others about it to make sure that we get out of this disastrous situation that we find ourselves in. We need to get to the point where every one of us here has a solution on the crime situation in South Africa and communicate our views. Your view is not too small to be taken seriously. We all know that police visibility goes a long way towards helping address the crime situation. I was telling some people somewhere that not so long ago I was in Shanghai, and I asked my colleague there, how do you get it right in a city that has a population of 24 million for people to be walking so freely at night? He said, have you moved around? I said, yes. He said, didn't you see that there is so much police visibility that at critical, at strategic points, you have even mobile police stations? He says to every police person, we attach 3 others who are not trained police people, but have just been given an induction. That's how serious we are. So, police visibility, I've heard people say that it's a struggle to even report crime. You call the police, they don't come. You go there, they say we don't have vehicles. I think we must prioritize rooting out crime. It addresses something else, which I may touch on shortly, and it is this. For people to want to invest in your country, they want to be assured that they will be safe in your country and that their belongings will be safe. Some of you have heard me repeat this many times. In a long discussion I had with President Kagame, marveling at the progress his country has made, knowing that they became a new country after the genocide at about the same time as South Africa, he said, we realize that until we address the issue of crime, we're going to have serious problems with investors. So a woman can walk at any hour of the night in Rwanda. Doesn't matter whether it's Kigali or the village. That's what we must strive towards. That's what we must talk about. Let us not just criticize. We have solutions to offer. We must never assume that only those in government have got answers. This is our government. They are governing through us and for us, and we owe this country the duty to proffer our suggestions. And that extends to corruption as well. But I think the church must rise up to address the corruption within the church itself. You can't induct your congregants on something that you don't have. You can't give them what you don't have. If you are a corrupt pastor, what can you say? Will it even have an impact? So the church must take its responsibilities very seriously, make sure that there is clean governance within the church itself. Yes. When that happens, members from your church, from all the churches, will be people of integrity, and they will spread that in the community at work. Before you know it, the critical mass that we need to be a nation that bears the reputation of integrity and that can be prosperous will be in place. Because it's not one person who can do it. The leader plays a critical role, but you need as many people as possible to be people of integrity. So the church must rise up. And maybe just to make an observation before I go any further. I'm just glad that it is Apostle Kure that the Lord used and that royalty from Nigeria is here, because I need to warn us about what may just happen to South Africa. 2-3 years ago, I was with a senior leader from Nigeria, and he said to me, are you aware that out of 36 states, 33 states in Nigeria are not able to pay their public servants? You're lucky as a government employee if you get half your salary. I was with a brother from Nigeria who has just had a PhD conferred on him. He's been working for a year for a university. He's not earning a salary. And he says that is the experience of many in the number one economy of the African continent. That's not too far from us. How seriously we assume the responsibility together as black and white South Africans and reject this artificial division that is based on nothing but color. The sooner we do that, the better. Otherwise, we'll get to that point where people are not paid. Now, competent people are needed. Competent people are needed. Exodus 18:21 talks about able men, able women, not just anybody who doesn't even know what they are doing. I believe that our municipalities are failing because people who don't know what they are doing have been put in positions of responsibility. And the public sector is no exception. The departments are no exception. You need a highly professionalized public service. You need a plan such as Singapore has, a clear plan on what kind of public servants you want to have, and make sure they are properly trained. And there must be a very well-developed vetting system to check out on those who are corrupt and those who are clean. Now, I've touched on education. We need to prioritize our education. We need to do something about our borders. I'm not saying people must be thrown out, but I'm saying, without any fear of contradiction, that our laws must be enforced. We know that our borders are porous. We need to do something about it. Because, just to cite myself as an example, many years back I was hijacked at gunpoint right inside of my home. Somebody just put a gun to my head like this and took my official vehicle away. Happily I screamed Jesus and he was paralyzed. He didn't shoot me. Now, those people could not be tracked. Their fingerprints were lifted, but because they came into the country illegally, nobody could track them down. And we know of many such incidents. So we've got to prioritize sealing our borders so that people can enter appropriately and we can treat them with the humanity that they deserve. Let's create those conditions that are critical for sustainable economic development to happen. Let's prioritize rooting out racism. People, we have been playing games with racism because we don't want to offend one another and because we don't know what to do. And I'm saying we don't know what to do because we haven't given much thought to what is it that we need to do. I am happy that after many of us have been campaigning for a long time, that the land issue must be debated and addressed, that the solution must come from black and white people coming together and saying, we don't want anything imposed on us. What are we going to do to solve this thing? People are beginning to talk about it. From this gathering, let there be individuals who will, among other things, make it their responsibility to look for an acceptable solution to the land issue. Because if it's not acceptable to all of us, black and white, there will be further divisions in this nation. We won't be able to do that which we need to do as a united South Africa. So let it worry you that this thing is not resolved. And God will release to you the solution that will be acceptable to everybody. I spent quite some time with farmers talking about, among other things, the land issue. People are willing, if only you would engage with them. So reflect on what you're going to do next year. Know that as an individual, there is so much difference you can make. It is not a coincidence that royalty from Nigeria is here, because one of the major and urgent issues that will have to receive our attention as a nation is normalizing relations between Nigeria and South Africa. For far too long have we allowed this artificial division to get deeper and deeper and deeper, and it has now even affected the judiciary of Nigeria and of South Africa. We don't seem to get along. I wrote a letter to my counterpart, not once but twice, not even a response did I receive. And I think it's the strategy of the devil to drive a wedge between South Africa and South Africa, because once we find one another as the two biggest economy in this country, then the destiny of Africa will be realized.
That's right.
We each need to reflect on what the ideal international relations policy we need to adopt as a nation is, and talk about it. It is the silence, it is the cowardice when the need arises to speak out that has kept us as trapped as we are. I said the other day, and I repeat, we have outsourced our thinking responsibilities to others. All they do is come up with sound bites and come up with eye-catching tweets, and we just follow mindlessly things that we ought not to follow. Things that were rejected in the past because they seem to attract media attention as others do them. You'll find even old people doing them. I think it is about time that we become those leaders that we really are. Now, as I conclude, we're going to have to pray. And I'm going to read Exodus 18:21 for the purpose of that prayer. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. This reflection on South Africa says to us, you need credible leaders at every level. And those are competent leaders, truthful leaders, who if they are politicians, when they campaign, they mean what they say, and they are committed to doing what they promise people they will do. Who hate covetousness. When you have leaders who hate covetousness, you can't have corruption, because it is covetousness that attracts or is part and parcel of the character of a corrupt person.
Mr. Chief Justice, welcome to the program, and thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you for inviting me.
The last time we met was at Parliament, at President Cyril Ramaphosa's maiden State of the Nation address. And I was sitting in the dignitaries box, and I watched you walk in with your fellow justices. And the thing that caught my mind was the respect and the admiration by all of the members of Parliament. A hush fell over the Parliament. The EFF was making a big noise, singing, but when you walked in, a hush fell over the whole room. People were looking at you, lifting up their cell phones, trying to get a picture. And when you were seated, I just noticed that everybody was gravitating towards you. And while I was watching that scene, it took me back to the time when you were nominated in August 2011. Then President Jacob Zuma nominated you as the Chief Justice of South Africa, and that nomination unleashed a wave of criticism against you. And I thought about that, and I thought, 7 years later, everybody respects you. Everybody looks up to you today. At the Judicial Services Commission hearings, shortly after your nomination, you made the statement and you said, "I believe God wants me to be the Chief Justice." It was widely reported in the media. You were criticized for that as well. But when we consider what has happened over the past 7 years in our country, with the state capture and the court hearings and everything else, and the critical role the judiciary played in protecting and upholding our Constitution, are you more convinced today that you, being the Chief Justice of South Africa, is God ordained?
Well, I've always been convinced. I think it's more about evidence being presented to the nation, and whoever might have doubted that what I said then is true. It is more for other people to connect with the reality and the truthfulness of the prophetic word that I was sharing with them, that I had held on to. I think I've actually always been certain that this is something that comes from God, because it was said many times over by the men of God that were sent my way.
And when I look at the comments on social media about you after your judgment in the Nkandla hearings, that was in March, 31st March 2016, most people then agree with you. This is 7 years later that we thank God for a man like Mogoeng, and that many believe and are convinced now that God placed you in that position for a time such as this.
Yes.
And I want to take you to March 2016, 31st of March 2016, and you made that watershed judgment in the Nkandla issue, which many people believe began unraveling the presidency of former President Jacob Zuma, and things begin to progress. You said, the Nkandla judgment deals with the issues of monumental importance for the people of the country and the well-being of our constitutional democracy. The Nkandla case provides profound lessons on the nature of and the wisdom behind the architectural design of our constitutional democracy. What do you mean in that statement?
Well, a reflection on that judgment would reveal that it was about the fundamentals of good governance and an attempt to articulate the responsibilities that rests on the executive and on Parliament, not only for the benefit of those charged with the responsibility to carry out the executive functions, or those charged with the responsibility to discharge legislative responsibilities, but also for the nation to know, one, that they are the ones who put these people in these positions to serve them. So it was basically to say nobody who assumes this position of high responsibility should ever take their eyes off the critical role that an incumbent is expected to play for the benefit of all of us. So that's the monumental nature of the monumental importance of the role expected to be played in terms of our constitutional dispensation by whoever occupies that position of responsibility.
You also used biblical terminology to describe the public protector, Thuli Madantsela's battle to protect the Constitution against the might of government. And I just want to remind you what you said. You said she, Thuli Madonsela, is the embodiment of a biblical David that the public is, who fights the most powerful and very well-resourced Goliath that impropriety and corruption by government officials are. The public protector is one of the true crusaders and champions of anti-corruption and clean governance. And the question I want to ask you is, what in your estimation is the major lesson we have all learned as a nation during former public protector Thuli Madonsela's tenure?
Well, I think the lesson that emerged from that tenure, particularly as it played itself out in matters that came before the court, was this. It's important to put in positions of high responsibility men and women of integrity, because if you do as a nation, you will get the exact result that you deserve to get from men and women of integrity who are competent, who are truthful, and would not take bribes. And the converse is true. If you don't put in these positions of responsibility, sensitive positions, people who have the wherewithal to do the right thing, you're going to suffer.
Yeah, and the Constitutional Court's judgment on former President Jacob Zuma in the Nkandla saga is what many believe turned around the battle against state capture, corruption, and all the other issues that we're still grappling with. In the delivery of your judgment on 31st March, you said, the President thus failed to uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. This failure is manifest from the substantial disregard for remedial action taken against him by the public protector in terms of her constitutional powers. Now, you found both the President and Parliament in breach of its constitutional obligations. And so that was a watershed judgment, I believe, that triggered a whole number of issues in South Africa. When you were appointed as Chief Justice in 2011, could you have anticipated in your wildest imagination that the judiciary would be called upon to rescue our democracy?
No. But there is something that kept bubbling, and it was this. Whenever God is determined to do the unimaginable through an individual, whenever exploits are to be done through a God-ordained incumbent, there are unprecedented storms that go ahead of him or her. Think about David. Between killing Goliath and assuming the position of king, so much more happened in between. It wasn't even looking likely that the prophetic word he had received would materialize. It didn't look likely that the anointing upon his life by Samuel would amount to anything. And the same applies to Joseph. God had spoken to him twice through a dream. But there was so much more that he had to go through first before he could assume his position of responsibility and measure the challenges that they have had to traverse against the impact that they made. So the sense I got was that something great is coming for the good of the nation, for the good of humanity, but I had no way of anticipating what form or shape it was going to take.
And during that time, watching the media, watching social media, most South Africans were looking for good, strong moral leadership in the country. And you spoke at a conference in Johannesburg in April 2016, and you said this: South Africa needs ethical leaders who can inspire and encourage to pursue a common goal. You said if ever there was a time to embrace ethical leadership, stop spinning, stop manipulating, stop relying on our supporters or sympathizers to do wrong, knowing that our own doing will be covered up in some way, the time is now. So in essence, what you're saying, if ever there was a time for ethical leadership in South Africa, the time is now. I want to ask you, with the election of President Cyril Ramaphosa and the change in government, do you believe that we have passed that danger? Do you still believe that your convictions are true, that now is the time for ethical leadership to arise in South Africa?
I think it is proper and safe for me to only go so far as to say I believe that South Africa needs ethical leadership. As to who the incumbent with the critical ethical credentials is something to be left to God and the people of South Africa. I think it's important to say at every level of leadership, be it the presidency, minister, in parliament, premiers, and so on, we need ethical leaders, and it is something that we must insist on forever.
You believe that ethical leadership is the catalyst then to turn South Africa around? Is that what we need?
That's what we need. You know, earlier in my presentation here, I quoted from the man Lauren Cunningham, who said, the reason why countries without resources like Switzerland, like Singapore and Japan are prosperous, unlike some of the African countries that are exceedingly endowed with mineral and natural resources and yet are poor, is this: you need leadership that has integrity, you need people of character, and you actually do need a critical mass of people in any given nation who are people of integrity to lead in order for a country to be prosperous in every respect.
I want to talk more about the judiciary. What you said about the judiciary when I first interviewed you in 2013, I want to go back to that. But we've run out of time, so when we come back after the break, more with the Chief Justice. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. I'm speaking to Chief Justice Mogoeng. Chief Justice, we're talking about the judiciary. It's a widely held perception that both the executive and Parliament led down the nation, especially in view of the Nkandla saga. Then President Jacob Zuma violated his oath of office, and so did Parliament. The question I want to ask you is, can the judiciary by itself and in itself defend and protect our Constitution?
Well, I've said it in certain platforms before, that every genuine constitutional democracy would have good reason to still entertain hope, to reorganize itself for a better tomorrow, even if the executive and parliament do not function to the satisfaction of the populace, for as long as you have in place a truly independent, functional, and effective judiciary. So to answer your question directly, I believe that for as long as the judiciary is independent, it will be able to help the nation walk on the right path again. I think a little bit of what happened in this country has demonstrated that. There was almost chaos in Kenya after the presidential elections. The judiciary stepped in, and the rest is history. There is normalcy precisely because the judiciary is independent and is committed to doing what it exists to do.
Okay. Over the past 5 years, with the state capture, the corruption, and all the issues that we went through as a nation, one of the things I've noticed is that civil society groups rose up and played a very critical role in holding government accountable. Do you encourage that?
I encourage that, but I encourage much more than organized civil society. I think every citizen must see it as his or her responsibility to worry about what is happening in this nation and identify the role that he or she can play in their own sphere of influence. I reiterate what I've said several times, and it is this: we have the tendency to be complacent as South Africans. We have a tendency to outsource our thinking responsibilities. I think the time has come for each and every one of us to never look down upon the importance of the role that they can play as individuals, as a group of friends, wheresoever they happen to operate.
A lot of criticism leveled against the church is that the church is merely a spectator when all of these things are happening, and the church should be speaking up more. What is your message to the church?
During the era of apartheid, we had a very vibrant church that had connected with its responsibilities as the conscience of the nation. Divided though the body of Christ was, under the auspices of the South African Council of Churches and even beyond, you had people like Reverend Frank Chikane, you had people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and Dr. Alan Buzak and many others, who knew that where an injustice is being perpetrated, it ill behooves the Church of God to fold its arms and be indifferent to the harm that is being done, to the injustice that is being done to fellow human beings. So I think it's time for the church to be relevant and to play its God-ordained role of demonstrating in very practical terms the love for the neighbor that we have been commanded to demonstrate.
You've been criticized a lot, and some of the criticism was that you're trying to shove religion down people's throats. Do you encourage Christians to get involved in politics, to get involved in public office, to serve?
Well, God is a politician. The Word of God tells us that God is the king, He's the judge and the lawmaker, the lawgiver. And a king and a lawgiver are political officers. So, and you would recall that Moses was all three in one.
That's right.
David, the man after God's own heart, was your modern day Christian, and yet he had a calling in the area of politics. The same applies to Joseph. The same applies to Daniel. Why should it be any different now? I think we're shirking our responsibilities as bearers of moral authority by not getting involved in politics. There is this thinking that politics is dirty. That's not true. It is dirty people who are involved in the political space who import their dirtiness into politics. If we all are clean, politics will be as clean as we are.
Yeah, so politics is a dirty business because there's dirty people in it.
Absolutely.
We need to get clean people in. One of the things I've noticed, Chief Justice, is you make a point of attending prayer meetings. We had one in this building, but at the It's Time prayer gathering in Cape Town in March, you attended that as well. Why is it important for you to attend gatherings like that?
Well, in the first place, I'm a Christian, and that has helped me to appreciate that there is very little we can do without divine intervention. I've seen the hand of God in my hand move me from a timid man without much confidence into a person with a boldness that sometimes shocks me. So I know that when the body of Christ pray together, there is so much more that can happen, and it can happen quicker than our minds can anticipate. So it's crucial that we intervene. In any event, it's the responsibility of every Christian not only to pray for the nation, but for the leaders as well.
That's right. Now, it brings me to the election coming up in 2019. having experienced what we have over the past, say, 10 years in South Africa, I think people are concerned, they're worried about where South Africa is going politically, our economy, state-owned enterprises, all of those issues. What would be your advice to South Africans in view of the elections next year?
Well, my advice would be, it certainly cannot be business as usual. Every vote in South African owes it to this nation and to Africa to reflect quite seriously on what has happened over the years and allow that to inform the way in which they must vote, including whether or not to make themselves available as candidates who can represent God in any of the constitutional structures that exist in this country. So
what you're saying is political parties not that important. If you're standing as a Christian, you represent God first and foremost in parliament, provincial legislatures, or wherever you serve.
Wherever you are, you can't become a person who does not live in line with biblical principles just because of office. I say that alive to the reality that some of the constitutional provisions are not in line with the Word of God. Where you are constrained by your constitutional responsibilities to do that which does not accord with the Word of God, that's something else. But integrity is consistent and reconcilable with everything in our Constitution. You can be a person of integrity, you can be a knowledgeable and competent person, you can be a person who abhors corruption, you can be a hard-working people who even identifies talent and grooms it. You can preach a message or encourage others to desist from criminality, to desist from corruption, to desist from lying and dishonesty. That's a role that a Christian leader can play wheresoever they might find themselves.
You nominated your deputy, Justice Raymond Zondo, to head the judicial inquiry into state capture. What is your expectations with the outcomes of that inquiry?
Well, you know, Deputy Chief Justice Zondo is a man of integrity, a very competent man, the only judge I know of to hold 3 master's degrees. And I expect him to come up with a report or recommendations that are consistent with the truth that would have been unearthed. He's not going to say, oh, it's so and so involved, let me see how to cover up for him or her. He will just deal with the issues as they are presented to him. So as soon as all the logistical arrangements have been made, as soon as all the resources they need are availed to them to be able to embark on this project, I expect him to hit the ground running, and the team that he has assembled is quite a solid team. So I'm expectant of everybody who might be involved in corruption or capture of sorts to be thoroughly exposed.
Okay, because that's the next question that most South Africans are asking. Will all of those involved with state capture and the corruption that we saw over the past years reported in the media, will they face justice? Will the Guptas face justice in South Africa?
Well, as a judge, I tend to approach things in a way that is different from the way that the public approaches things. To members of the public, all the Guptas who are allegedly involved in corruption are already guilty. A judge ought not to approach things that way. A judge ought not to say, the media has been reporting on this thing, the public believes these people are corrupt, therefore I dare not exonerate any of them even if there is no evidence. My point is, let the evidence inform the decision.
Let the evidence inform the decision. Okay, Mr. Chief Justice, once again I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak to us May God bless you in the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much for inviting me. God bless you too.